Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. The people on live stream, I'm assuming you can hear me? Yes. I can try to I have to finish the book today. So if I finish in time, then I will give you the summary. But we're already starting a little later than planned. So here's the summary. He went to Hajj and a lot of things happened. A lot of awesome things. Last week was his Hajj trip. So let me finish this and I'll try to give you the summary right after that, inshallah. If not, some good chapters here that you can go ahead and read. Just before we begin, next 2 weeks we're not going to have sessions. Next week is a long weekend, people may be traveling. And the week after, I just have to plan out any changes we're making to timing because the Sunday school is now starting here as well. So it's going to be a full masjid. And as a result, we want to move it to a time where it's not going to be interfering with other programs. The second thing is that we're starting the new book next session, which is called Habib Time, Khabib, and the word time, Time. And that's Habib Nurmagomedov's autobiography, which I'm doing with another group right now. It's really interesting as well. You can get that online for free. I got it online for free. Not a bootleg copy, a legitimate copy through Amazon for free online. And this time I'm going to be asking us to read the chapters with me. I didn't make you do it this time with Malcolm X, but this upcoming session you'll read the chapters with me. That way you know what I'm talking about, inshallah. Those are two announcements, inshallah. So last time when we had met, we discussed about Malcolm X's trip to Hajj, and just a brief summary was he left for Hajj because of the fact that the Nation of Islam had excommunicated him. And he had come to a point of complete confusion. He went to his sister Ella. Ella actually was removed from the Nation of Islam. She was too boisterous, too outspoken, too opinionated for the Nation of Islam to keep her. And she actually began to start a school. And that school began to bring in so much money, she intended to go for Hajj. But when she intended to go for Hajj, Malcolm one day came to her and without knowing her intention said that, I want to go for Hajj. And she said, how much do you need? And she immediately sacrificed her whole trip just for his trip. And on his trip to Hajj, you see the sort of the salient features was the fact that he began to meet people whom in America would be considered the devil, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, very light complexion, different skin colors, different shades, different tones. And he began to interact with all of them, and they were sharing food, sharing a place of prayer, sharing a place of sleep. And he realized quickly that that devilish, quote-unquote, behavior was not a racial trait, or it was not a color-based trait. It was more of a trait of an ideology based on where you live. And I had shared how when I lived in Africa, I remember despite my darker complexion, some of the natives in Zambia would say that, oh, you're a really good white man. I'm like, I'm not white, I'm darker than you. Like, no, you don't understand what white man means, and they began to explain it. And so Malcolm began to see that there's a difference between someone who's white and a quote-unquote white man. And that really began to change Malcolm. So when he came back, he traveled the Muslim world then. He went to Egypt, he went to different places, Ghana, Egypt, etc. And he began to speak to the leaders in Saudi as well. And he began to slowly see that he does not know Islam. He was telling them about some of the aqidah points of the Nation of Islam, what happens at the end of time, how creation started, etc. And they're like, this is not Islamic. And he was shocked. And it was as if he was an elementary school student speaking to a college professor when he himself was such a high caliber speaker and intellectual here in America. So it was a big change for Malcolm. Excuse me. Now Malcolm, he returns. And his return, when he comes back, it sparks a lot of interest in the community. Because now all of a sudden when he comes back, and I covered some of the interviews last time, was people asked, is it true that you've changed your opinion and that you no longer oppose the white man? He said, I'm willing to work with anyone who's willing to work with us to bring equality, to remove racialism, etc. And there's a beautiful debate. You have to watch it online. There's a video for about 10 minutes of it where Malcolm X goes into the Oxford Union, and he has one of the popular Oxford Union debates where he debates a person whose name is slipping my mind right now, and he completely destroys him. But you see the change of mind. He's no longer violent. He's not non-violent, but he's no longer violent. He still believes in this idea of any means necessary, but any means necessary has much more of a wisdom behind it. So anyway, let's move forward. I just want to move forward to where we're going to pick up today. So that's sort of where we had left off last time. 1965, which is the final chapter of this text, then there's the epilogue itself, is Malcolm X in 1965, this is his final year of life. And it's interesting, the previous chapter ends with a very interesting interaction over here. And he's speaking, I'm going to just go to this final section of the previous chapter, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, where he's speaking, where he says that my pilgrimage broadened my scope. It blessed me with a new insight. In 2 weeks in the Holy Land, I saw what I never had seen in 39 years in America. I saw all races, all colors, blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans in true brotherhood and unity, living as one, worshiping as one, no segregationists, no liberals. They would not have known how to interpret the meaning of those words. And that's what we ended up on last time. He really felt, and this is why, despite the fact that he's only Muslim for about 1 year, a year and a half. His Sunni Orthodox Islam is a very short period of time in his life. Yet we all claim him and celebrate him because every change he tried to make in terms of social changes, in terms of economic changes, all these changes, he always based it off Islam. We have many Muslims today who are trying to make changes, but they base it off academia and they base it off other things. But Malcolm always said, I found the solution within Islam. And that solution he found in Islam, he always told people. We all worship as one. We all have one focus. And he began to propose Islam as a solution. Not components of Islam, but Islam itself as the solution. The cicada. And that's what really made him a revivalist within our community. And he says later that, yes, I have been convinced that some American whites do want to help cure the rampant racism which is on the path to destroying this country. And he continued, why here in America the seeds of racism are so deeply rooted in the white people collectively, their belief that they are superior in some ways so deeply rooted. Now these things are in the national white subconsciousness. Many whites are even actually unaware of their own racism until they face some tests and then their racism emerges in one form or another. So he's begin to supplant this connection that, look, it's not being white. It's what you've been taught and what you believe, and this is what has to be changed. And finally, he mentions the next day when he was driving in the freeway, he came to a red light. A white woman pulled alongside and looked to me. And she was there with the white man. He said, Malcolm X, he called out. And when I looked out, he stuck his hand out of his car across at me, grinning. Do you mind shaking hands with the white man? Now, if you remember Malcolm X years back, when there was even a white young woman who was volunteering to help out. I'm not like my ancestors. I'm very different. I want to be part of change. What can I do? And Malcolm says nothing. And breaks her heart because that's what he believed back then. And here is a woman and a man. They pull over. The man reaches his hand out and says, Malcolm X, do you mind shaking, what did he say? He said, do you mind shaking hands with the white man? Imagine that. Just as the traffic light turned green, I told him, I don't mind shaking hands with human beings. Are you one? And so now the perspective has changed. We're all humans, and as long as we consider ourselves to be humans, and we act as humans, and we believe as humans, to carry out the premise of humanity's growth, that's what he wanted to be a part of. And so now he began to look to demand civil rights in the most pure form. He mentions, I must be honest, Negroes, Afro-Americans, showed no inclination to rush to the United Nations and demand justice for themselves in America. I really had known in advance that they wouldn't. The American white man has so thoroughly brainwashed the black man to see himself as only a domestic civil rights problem that it will probably take longer than I live before the Negro sees the struggle of the American black man is international. And he continues a little more about it in connection to Islam. But one of the things that he brings out is this is not an American problem. Racism is not an American problem. Any of us who are Indo-Pak, online or in person, we know racism is rampant. The terms that we use to describe races aside from us, ethnicities aside from us, I don't want to reiterate them, but it's very problematic. It's derogatory the way we look at others. And other cultures have it as well. I speak from the Indo-Pak perspective because I happen to be Indo-Pak in my ethnicity. But we have this issue. And because we have that issue, people always say, oh, I'm colorblind. People aren't colorblind. People aren't. And it's okay not to be colorblind. But the issue comes when a person's lack of colorblindness causes a change in their interaction with others, and that's what Malcolm mentions. And he said that Negroes, had I known too that Negroes would not rush to follow me into the Orthodox Islam, which had given me the insight and perspective to see that the black man and white man truly could be brothers, America's Negroes, especially older Negroes, are too indelibly soaked in Christianity's double standard of oppression. So the public invited meetings, which I began holding each Sunday afternoon or evening in Harlem's well-known Audubon Ballroom, and Audubon Ballroom is going to be important about when he passes away, I addressed predominantly non-Muslim Negro audiences. I did not immediately attempt to press the Islamic religion, but intended to embrace all who sat before me. And so he begins to be very wise in his approach. Yes, he preaches Islamic principles. Yes, he speaks about Islam, but he never cuts people off. And this is actually the way of the Prophet ﷺ. When we see one of the Arabs in the Hajj had asked them, what do you call to? He didn't say, I call, and he began to say the 5 pillars, etc. He says, let me tell you what Allah calls us to. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. He doesn't say pray 5 times a day and fast the month of Ramadan, etc. The Prophet ﷺ, what does he tell them? He tells them what Allah tells them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. Verily Allah commands towards justice and goodness. وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. And to bind and give towards your relatives. وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. And he warns us and he prohibits us away from doing what? Any illicit, embarrassing acts, prohibited acts, and demeaning acts. يَعِظُكُمْ, a warning, لَعَلَّمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, so you can remember, be reminded what Allah commands you. This is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And so now Malcolm, he begins to call out for people to stand up, and to people to grasp their rights. Now what's the response? The response is that he's, quote unquote, as he says, stirring up Negroes. Why? Because people were not content with breaking the status quo. They wanted the status quo to remain. People were content. You know, there's a brother here, I was supposed to call him today. He told me to call him next week to remind him about the program. Now I remember, so I feel bad. We spoke a couple weeks ago, and he said when I first came, and I spoke about him last week. Now when I first came, African-American brother, I wasn't really welcomed. He wasn't not welcomed, but just because of whom he wasn't given like special treatment, etc. It wasn't turned away, but he wasn't made to feel special. But alhamdulillah, he persisted, and now he's a very beloved member of this community. But the idea is what? Malcolm, when he told people to be human, it was so against the US norm that people couldn't accept it. So they felt that Malcolm, in their own words, was the angriest Negro in America. And they would say, Malcolm X advocates armed Negroes. And he says, what's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. I was a black man talking about physical defense against the white man. And so it again came down to an ideological difference. And so, what everyone wanted was, Malcolm would say, like, these Gandhian philosophy, that's what they wanted the minorities to accept. Martin Luther King, he was very much inspired by these types of teachings, to be nonviolent, to use your words and not your actions. Our deen is very balanced. We don't encourage violent acts. We don't. We also recognize that violence sometimes is a necessity. What does this mean? It doesn't mean that we try to become violent people. But at the same time, if someone is violent against you, to turn the other cheek is not necessarily an Islamic teaching. It's a Christian teaching. The Judaic teaching is what? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, etc. The Islamic teaching is a balance. You could have hilm and forbearance and turn the other way, or you can respond and defend yourself. And both are permissible within our deen, and both have a time and a place. The Prophet ﷺ at times turned away, and especially when the rights of others are violated, then he would stand up for them. And so what Malcolm is doing, he's trying to show them that, look, your preaching, this turning the other cheek, is a convenient teaching for yourself. Because if you want to practice it, then when we demand our rights, you should turn the other cheek and not respond. But what do? You take out those hose and pressure wash, like those powerful hoses, those fireman hoses, and hose down people, tearing off their clothing and parts of their skin, rashing them with water. In your response, where's your turn the other cheek then? So it's Malcolm was trying to show them, look, the hypocrisy of your own actions and statements.
Forget about what we're doing. The hypocrisy of your own response is extremely problematic. And what he says is white society hates to hear anybody, especially a black man, talk about the crime the white man has perpetuated on the black man. And take away white man and black man for a moment. Look at any other concept of inequality. Look at within the Muslim community. The wealthy Muslims hate to hear about the impoverished Muslims. Not all, but many. Why? Because then they feel guilty. This guilt complex, it sinks in, and there's one of two ways to approach it. One, to address the issue, or two, to avoid the issue. And it's easier to avoid the issue, and this is what Malcolm did not want. So regardless, Malcolm continues later. He says, our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race. Indian meaning the Native American. Even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shores, the scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society from the 16th century forward. Blood flowed in battles over racial supremacy, etc., etc. Now, again, how do we look at this? We look at Muslims and we have the following responses. Yeah, that's definitely true. That's problematic, etc. But the moment this can be applied to our own lives, you have the Pakistani-Indian conflict always. Oh, you're Pakistani, you can't marry my daughter. You're Indian, you cannot marry my daughter or son, etc. Or you have within Punjab, within Pakistan, the Balochis, and you have these intra-country conflicts as well. We have these conflicts. And we're always so quick to say, oh yeah, there's racism, but we don't identify within ourselves. And what Malcolm wants to show is that this exists inherently within many people. And if you want to change, you can't only go out to make the change, you have to look within yourself to make the change as well. So Malcolm is constantly, even within the African Americans, he hated, when, the actions of some blacks. You know how he spoke before when he was, when he had gone in for the screening when they tried to get him to be in the draft, and he was saying that nurse or that secretary was one of those black women, those who try to show themselves. I'm not like them. We see that all the time. I've been through the TSA security lines at the airport. Anytime I get a Desi, I'm like, give me anyone, not a Desi. Because the Desi wants to show, I'm not like that Desi. You see this guy here in his long garment and his beard? I'm like you. So then they give me a really hard time. Everyone else gives me an easy time. They go through, they check me, etc. Even if they have to, they take off your kufi, they'll ask nicely, are you allowed to remove this? Yes, I am, etc. Even my most recent flight, which recently, when I was going through, they're like, are you allowed to move it? And the other person jumped in, he's not allowed to remove it. I'm like, no, I am allowed to remove it. I showed it was underneath, and I put it back on. They said, okay, you can continue. Those types of things, you see, our own people sometimes are very quick to get the upper hand, to put the foot on top of the neck of the other, to go higher. And that's what Malcolm is saying. We are destroying ourselves for the sake of what our own quote-unquote growth. And so now, over a period of time, Malcolm's notoriety is beginning to grow. He is calling group by group by group, despite their race, their ethnicity, their ideological difference. He even reached out to Martin Luther King Jr. Let's sit down and see how can we gather together to subsequently make this change that will change America for everyone. Now, as he mentions, politics dominated the American scene when I was traveling abroad this time. I felt, and he moves further, I felt that as far as the American black man was concerned, they were just both about the same, meaning what? The different types of political groups. I felt that as for the black man, only a question of Johnson the fox or Goldwater the wolf, meaning these different groups, who's going to attack them for their own benefit. So for Malcolm, he began to see how can we grow a movement of change from within ourselves without being reliant on others. And I want everyone to look at this for a moment. Even in our own political landscape, the Muslims towards the Democrats and the Republicans, we always try to see who's going to defend us. I'm not saying don't be politically involved. I'm not saying don't vote. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when a person sells their own principles for the sake of support, only to see that support vanish in front of their eyes. In 2000, some of you weren't even born in 2000, I remember 2000, the first Muslim bloc vote in history. Do you remember that? Yeah. That was it was Bush versus Gore. And the Muslim bloc vote, what was the Muslim bloc vote? All the Muslims said we're going to bloc vote for Bush. Because Al Gore's running mate was Joseph Lieberman. He was a Jewish man. And they said, we can't vote in a Jew. This was our national platform we stood on. I shouldn't say we. I was vehemently against this. I didn't vote. I was like, I'm not against this. And when Rashad comes back, I'll see if he remembers this. And so subsequently, Bush won. And what happens under Bush's policies after 9/11, in Afghanistan, the Iraq war, what happened with our vote? This is what happens when you try to, I'm not saying don't be politically active, but be politically intelligent. You have to understand who the wolf is, even if that person's temporarily in sheep's clothing. Because it's very easy at the time when you're running for a position to put on sheep's clothing and say, oh, I'm okay and I have no problem and I'm with you, etc. But the moment that's dropped, that type of, what's what I'm looking for, that type of a false premise to gain votes and garner support, the moment that leaves and exits, then you're sort of stuck with that person. And so Malcolm, he mentions about that the goal has always been the same, with the approaches to it as different as mine and Dr. Martin Luther King's nonviolent marching that dramatizes the brutality and the evil of the white man against defenseless blacks. In the racial climate of today's country, it is anybody's guess of which of the quote-unquote extremes in approach to the black man's problems might personally meet a fatal catastrophe. First, nonviolent Dr. King, or so-called violent me. And it's true, one doesn't necessarily garner support. Anything I do today I regard as urgent. No man is given but so much time to accomplish whatever is in his life's works. And you see here, and actually before as well, Malcolm felt his end was coming. He felt his end was coming. My life in particular never has stayed fixed in one position for very long. You have seen how throughout my life I've often known unexpected drastic changes. I'm only facing the facts when I know that any moment of any day or any night could bring me death. And then he said, this is particularly true since the last trip I made abroad. I've seen the nature of things that are happening and I've heard things from sources which are reliable. He knew things are going to change. He very much knew in this 39th year, he doesn't live to 40, I'm 40. Malcolm died younger than I am. When he left this world as Shaheed, he was younger than I am currently today. And the types of changes he made was before he left his, at least on the Gregorian level, his youth. Because Islamic, you become a man at the age of 40. But he was very motivated. He was very disciplined. That's one lesson we learned from him. He did not sell himself short. He never compromised. He was willing to work with others, but not compromise. And he worked as if death was right behind him. We didn't cover his marriage, but if you look at his whole betrothal, how he proposed and the quote-unquote courting, it was very businesslike. Because Betty Shabazz, this is in the Nation of Islam, when it seemed like she wanted to marry him, but he was very straightforward. If you want to be with me, we must marry, and then let's meet here, and then get the nikah. That's how it was. He had no time to fool around. He was a very focused man on what his end goal was. So he accomplished in 39 years. Take away 39 years, because we know it's really in the last 8 years that all these changes. Prior to that, he's in prison, and then before that, he's running the streets. Before that, he just moves to Boston. Before that, he's in Lansing. It's not like he has that much productive life in terms of years, but in terms of accomplishments. A man who lived with almost a zero bank account, who had no house to his name, sort of had a house to his name, had sort of some clothes to his name, pretty much that was it. There were times they lived, they had no food. There were times they lived where they had nothing else, but the family sacrificed. And this is one of the things I was mentioning to the brother last week, that we as a Muslim community, we failed Malcolm X. Now, you might say you didn't because you were not alive then, but the community that was there upon his assassination, we failed them. Because we never took care of his family afterwards. We claimed his name, we claimed his fame, and we never at one point helped his family. His wife passed away in a really gruesome way, where she died, she was burnt alive. Where were we? Where were we when his daughters needed help, etc.? We weren't there. And it's one of the lessons we should learn post-mortem of the idea that if we're we can't always be takers. You have imams in this community. You have to be a giver to the imam. Not you, because that's your brother. But the rest of you guys, you have to be like givers to the imams. You have to see these imams are taking time out, they're giving back to the community. How am I cooking for them? Am I helping them out, etc.? Am I asking to take their kids off their hands to give them some time, even just for some relaxation? Board members, etc., volunteers in the Sunday school level. Why? Because when you give them ease, then they're able to replenish themselves to give back. Malcolm X never had that replenishment. He just went pedal to the metal, full throttle all the way till the end. Anyway, the week before he passes away, Malcolm his house was bombed. His house was bombed. There was an attempt on his life. And the Nation of Islam, it was them who threw, I think from 2 locations of the house in the middle of the night, threw in a burning cocktail and lit the house on fire. It was arson. They tried to kill him. They were unsuccessful. He was able to escape with his wife and his kids. And he actually had a speech the next day. It's a very interesting speech because he begins his speech by saying that he wasn't appropriately dressed. And that's something he carried on from the Nation of Islam, to always be nicely dressed and professional. But everything was burnt at that point. And he pretty much is a dead man walking, and he recognized that. And the next week, he's going to speak at the Autobahn. And I mentioned the Autobahn earlier. That's where he was bringing... I just lost the page, one moment. Okay. So Malcolm, now he has this gathering, and he has this speech, and he actually contacts his wife and kids, and he asks them to come to the speech. It wasn't his habit, but he said, "I want you to be there. I want you to be present." He had an inclination of what was going to happen, and so as Malcolm took the stage, he's introduced. In hindsight now, through all the reports we see, it wasn't just the nation. The FBI was in it as well. So it was an American, meaning American government, working with the Nation of Islam to take him out. They both had their own interests. The American government felt he was way too powerful. And the Nation of Islam felt that he could at any moment and he was taking over Muslim lives, not because he was forcing it, because they were attracted to his message. So anyway, Malcolm, I'm going to skip some of this over here and just go straight to the end over here because that's all we have time for. So Malcolm, he gets up after address. He says, "Assalamu alaikum." He greets the audience. As he does this, about 8 rows in, there's like a little clamor. And in that clamor, what do we see? Can you get him a chair? Assalamu alaikum. Come on, get him a chair, You see a man raises his voice, "Get your hand out of my pocket," which is usually like are you trying to grab a gun, you're trying to steal from me? And the entire audience looks back. So when they look back, they lose sight of what's happening in the front. So everyone's paying attention to this. This is very clearly planned. And Malcolm says, hold it, don't get excited. Let's cool it, brothers. At that moment, with everyone's attention over there, everyone's looking back. The gunman stood up, and she said, shots rang out. This is a woman who's saying what happened. The commotion back there diverted me just for an instant, and I turned back to look at Malcolm X, just in time to see at least 3 men in the front row stand and take aim and start firing simultaneously. It looked like a firing squad. Numerous persons, another person said, shots rang out. Men, women, and children ran for cover. They stretched out on the floor and ducked under the tables. You see another person saying, it sounded like an army had taken over. Somehow I knew. I wouldn't go and look. I wanted to remember him as he was, because for them, they knew if they turned back, they would see a deceased Malcolm. Malcolm's hand flew, some witnesses say his hand flew to his chest as the first of 16 shotgun pellets or revolver slugs hit him. And the other hand flew up. The middle finger of the left hand was bullet shattered. It got blown off. And blood gushed from his goatee. He clutched his chest. His big body suddenly felt big. He wasn't large. He wasn't stocky. He was a tall, broad man. He was in very good shape. His big body suddenly fell back stiffly, knocking over 2 chairs. His head struck the floor with a thud. And then Betty Shabazz, who was there, she came with her children now. So she witnesses this, and her kids see this. She ran crying hysterically, "My husband, they're killing my husband." And an unidentified photographer snapped shots of Malcolm X with people bent over him, snatching part of his bloody shirt. They tried to give him mouth to mouth. They tried to do CPR. Another woman said, "I don't know how I got up on the stage, but I threw myself down on..." on who I thought was Malcolm, but it wasn't. I was willing to die for the man. Excuse me. I would have taken the bullets myself. Then I saw Malcolm, the firing had stopped, and I tried to give him artificial respiration. And then his wife says, they killed him, and at this point, they're trying to revive him. The hospital is across the street. They call on, no one comes to tend to him. The hospital is literally across the street. No ambulance, no physician. They run over, they go inside, they quote unquote steal, they take a cart, a bed, they roll it across, they place him on him, they're calling in, Malcolm's been shot, get him, let's go get him. The two, it says here, the two policemen grabbed by the arms a Negro who was kicking as he tried to escape, firing a warning shot into the air. The policeman pushed him into the police car. They didn't want the crowd to come close, so the crowd was trying to kill these men. And then they took him across the street, literally, Columbia Presbyterian Hospital's emergency clinic, and he was put in a stretcher, and at 3:15 he was announced that he'd passed away. And this was complete shock, because the face of potential change in America, even for white people, had now just been assassinated. And what's very interesting was that if you look at his pictures, there's two pictures for his burial. One is in a complete suit. And then you have the prince, I forget from where, was it of Saudi, I believe, had flown in and actually come in, and he took off those clothing, gave him a complete ghusl, and shrouded him in the Islamic garment and prayed janazah over him, and he was buried as a Muslim. And so this is the life of Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. And, we didn't do justice by going through it so quickly. But one of the things that we know is that people say that if Malcolm was alive today, the whole world would have been different. And you can see, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zaid Shakib, Dr. Farooq Abdullah, Omar Farooq Abdullah, we see Stephen Jackson, the recent Muslim convert. All these individuals, they became Muslim after reading this. That this man's life was so penetrating just by his words. And I have a collection, 1,000-something pages of his speeches, and his videos. The collection, mine doesn't matter anymore. It's all available online. I would recommend, if you want them, you reach out to me. I will send it to you online. Or many of his speeches, even his pre-Sunni Islam speeches, have a lot of good messages in it. So we'll stop over here. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. It's 1:15. It's adhan time. Just a quick announcement again. Next week there's no session because it's a long weekend. The week after, you're getting a 1-week break, so 2 weeks off, and then we're starting Khabib time, Khabib Nurmagomedov's autobiography. I have to go home, get my kids for Dhuhr, so I'll see you guys later. Sorry? And the time will change. I don't know till when, but the time will change, probably till a Saturday, okay? I'm going to go get my kids for Dhuhr, inshallah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.